Hey everyone, it's Ashley. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be focusing on Eclipse card techniques. And if you're not familiar with that, it's what you see here. Basically, there is a design on a card front and there is a word die or letter dies cut out from that card front. You can barely see it, but the really cool thing about this is that you can keep your design intact. So I'm going to go over a few ways that we can make those today. I'm going to be using this My Favorite Things Thanks word die. I like using these better than individual alphabet dies just because I don't really have to line each die individually up, and I like that. I'm going to also be using a Concord and Ninth So Lovely stamp set. I'm going to be using a Cuttlebug embossing folder and some pattern paper for this first card. So like I said, I really like using a word die like this, and My Favorite Things has quite a few because I don't have to worry about lining each individual letter up. And to make sure that I've lined the word die up correctly, I'll just take a T ruler, I believe it's called, and just make sure that the bottom lines up. And I'm going to stick it on with a piece of painter's tape just to make sure that it doesn't shift in my die cutting machine. You can see once I take it out, all of the little letters have already come out, and that's great. I don't have to worry about taking them out. So you see here I have the letters separate from the card front, and now I'm going to put the card front into the embossing folder and then run that through my die cutting machine. There's a reason that I decided to do the die cut before I put it through with the embossing folder, and that is because the embossed card front will serve as a contrast for the letters. So it will give it a little bit more of a pop and make it a little easier to see the sentiment because, like I said, sometimes it's a little tough to see the die cuts on these types of cards. Even though we are going to have that contrast with the embossed card front and the non-embossed letters, I still want a little bit more contrast. So I'm going to trim this patterned paper, and this is going to go underneath the card front where it says thanks. And I'm just going to do that with some glue, and I'll show you here in just a minute. I'm going to use Tombow Mono liquid glue. And as you can see, it's going to serve as sort of a backdrop to these letters. So it's not just going to be white on white, it's going to be white with a subtle background on white, and it'll just give it a little bit more to look at. It doesn't make a real massive difference, but it's enough in my mind that makes me feel a little bit better that you can see the letters popping out of the card front a little bit more. I'm going to speed you up quite a bit here because this is just a lot of cutting really thin pieces of foam tape and attaching them to the backs of all of these letters. And what that does is give dimension to the letters. So since you're already going to be sitting on top of the letters that you've cut out, if you give it a little dimension with foam tape, it really drives home that sentiment popped out from the card front rather than just having it glued right in there. And also, if we just glued it right in there, you wouldn't be able to see any of that pretty pattern paper background that we put on there. So it's another reason I've decided to do it with foam tape. But I have to say, I'm kind of liking just the pattern paper background. I don't hate it. I trimmed the center of the A a little bit and glued it in there just so you could see a little bit of the card or the pattern paper through there. I'm going to trim a piece of cardstock to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, and I'm going to blend some Distress Oxide worn lipstick all around the edges of this cardstock. And the reason that I only need it on the edges is because I'm going to just use it as a matted background for my card front. And because there's such a small margin of error, my card front is 4 by 5 1/4, I'm going to use Tombow Mono liquid glue. That way when I adhere it onto my matted front, I have a little bit of wiggle room. I can move it a little bit to the right or to the left until it's perfectly centered, something that you really can't do with double-sided tape or foam tape, really. You could try to tear it off, but sometimes it tears the cardstock. So now that I have that on there and centered, all I'm going to do is place it on my card base. This is an A2 size card base, and I'm going to again adhere it with Tombow Mono liquid glue to make sure that I get a nice centered card front. Once I get it all nice and centered, I decide that I want a little bit of a sentiment strip on the card. I just think it looks a little bit plain, so I decide to pull out an old stamp set from Mama Elephant called Many Thanks, and I'm going to prep a piece of black cardstock, just the corner there, and I'm using the sentiment that says, "For all you do," and I'm just going to stamp that in Versamark ink on the bottom left corner there where I prepped it. And then I'm going to emboss it in white embossing powder. So the end sentiment will say, "Thanks for all that you do." So now I'm going to trim the sentiment strip down, and I'm going to adhere the sentiment strip with foam tape so that it pops out a little bit, just like the word die. And to do this, because it's really thin, I'm just going to snip a small piece of foam tape off and then trim that into several very thin pieces that I can adhere to the back of the strip without being able to see it. And then I will go ahead and adhere the sentiment strip right below and centered to my thanks die, so that once again the full sentiment reads, "Thanks for all you do." So that is the finished card. You can see underneath the letters just a tiny bit. You just get that little bit of contrast, and I think it's just so worth it. For my next card, I'm jumping right in because I want to really focus on just the Eclipse technique. So I'm doing some really simple watercoloring with dye inks, and to do that I just push the dye ink down on a glass mat and use my water brush to just do a really simple watercolor job. I'm going to, same thing I did with the first card, cut the thanks die out directly from the center. I'm also going to put a black background just as we have the patterned paper in the last card, but now I'm going to do black just because I think it goes a little bit better with the stamp here right in the center. And again, same thing with the letters. I'm going to adhere those letters with foam tape. And the only reason that I'm showing you this card versus the last card is because this card obviously is a little tougher to see, but the design on the card front is much more elaborate. So it's definitely something that you want to think about which way you'd like to go with your Eclipse card. I made a black matted background, and I'm going to adhere it to my card front with Tombow Mono liquid glue. And just for an added piece of dimension, I'm going to be using glossy accents right over the letters, and this will also serve just to give a little bit of shine and really make those letters pop. I hope that you've enjoyed my video, and I hope that you've maybe gotten a few ideas to make an Eclipse card of your own. As always, my blog, Instagram, and Pinterest are linked in the description, as well as all of the supplies used here today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.